It's been a week for sporting metaphors. Rishi Sunak fired the starting gun on the election, but did he stumble at the first campaign hurdle? Keir Starmer, quick out of the blocks, but who knows if he'll last the distance. And as the bookies discovered in yesterday's Cup final, there's no such thing as a dead cert.
Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future.
The Prime Minister surprised everyone. Perhaps he should have warned the guy who brings the umbrellas. Keir Starmer kicked off in a football stadium, naturally. He neglected to mention that his red team lost to the Blues on the last day of the season. This time, it's not just the big two that will count. With 30% of the polls between them, the others make this the most unpredictable race for decades. James Cleverly is the Home Secretary. He'll speak to us about an eye-catching plan to introduce mandatory national service and why the Conservative campaign has got off to such a difficult start. Liz Kendall is the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, with the crucial task of reducing the number of people off sick and on benefits. We'll talk about Labour's smooth election campaign start and the party's plans for government. And Nigel Farage has loomed large over British politics for years, if not decades. He founded UKIP and the Brexit Party, and he's now Honorary President of the successor Reform UK. Plus, with us throughout the show, a trio of distinguished insiders. Conservative peer Lord Danny Finkelstein, Labour peer Baroness Aisha Hazarika, and broadcaster Rachel Johnson. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. To have voted in an election that did not put a Conservative in Downing Street, you have to be almost 40 years of age. That was Tony Blair's third victory in 2005, and it took place before Facebook was Facebook and before anyone had ever pressed send on a tweet. Right now, the polls say that Labour is well ahead. Sky News' tracker puts them 21 points clear. But Labour's High Command daily reminds its troops that they thought they were heading for victory in 1970, 1987 and 1992. And still, they managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory on every occasion. However, to my mind, the big parties are still shadowboxing. Neither has yet to land a serious blow. In fact, the single most consequential event of the past 3 days has come from what is now Britain's third most popular political party. Reform currently polling ahead of the Lib Dems. The decision by Reform's president, Nigel Farage, not to contest a parliamentary seat is baffling to many, including me. I just don't buy his protestation that he wants to spend more time with his buddy Donald Trump ahead of the American election in November. Win or lose, he could still be serving as Trump's warm-up man after July the 4th. So what's he really up to? Maybe we'll get some clues when I talk to him later. But let's start with the government. Earlier, I spoke to the Home Secretary, James Cleverly. Home Secretary, before we discuss the detail of your compulsory national service proposal, a couple of yes-no questions. What happens if someone says, I don't want to do it? Do they go straight to jail?
No, there's going to be no criminal sanction for this. No one's going to jail over this. But what we have seen from the other countries that have got similar schemes to this, particularly the Baltic and Scandinavian countries, firstly, there is actually very, very wide-scale take-up, acceptance and enthusiasm for this. So we want to make this compelling. We are going to compel people to do it, but also we want to make sure that it fits with different people's aptitudes and aspirations. So the military bit, and I'm sure we come on.
I want to come on to that, but just, let me ask you another just very brisk question. Are people going to get paid for this if they do the volunteering or the civil option rather than the military option?
So the military option will come with a salary because it is longer and therefore by extension. The other elements of it won't be. And I mean, and that is very much, well, that's very much in keeping. So I was in the reserve forces, as you know. The military reserve forces are paid. For example, Special Constabulary are not. St John's Ambulance people are not. So that mix is actually quite in keeping with the structures that we already have.
Yeah, but honestly, that's your first problem, isn't it? Are you going to get 18-year-olds?
It's not been a problem so far.
Sign up for a weekend a month for nothing?
Yeah, because actually what we've seen, as I say, the military reserve forces are paid and their firefighting, policing counterparts are not. So that mixed portfolio, that mixed ticket is well established. And what we want, of course, is we want to make sure that everybody is involved, because this is about building a network across society. All right,
let's start with the military side, because you know who's going to hate this? Your colleagues, you're a soldier, your colleagues in the military, your Defence Minister, Andrew Morrison, said to the Financial Times about an idea before this came up, a similar idea. There's a cost, and that is training people up, looking after them, managing them, and then they disappear as they're becoming vaguely useful. So the people who are going to operate this clearly aren't going to fancy it much, especially as armed forces are under strength, they've got lots of work to do. Do they need some people who are not that useful for them until they're about to leave?
Well, what we're looking to do, first and foremost, no one is going to be compelled to do the military element. So whilst it is compulsory,
no, but some
the military
will do. You're hoping that some will do.
Some will do.
And my point is the military won't like it.
No, of course, by nature, the people doing the military element will have volunteered to do the military version of it. So they will be motivated to join the military. They will have the opportunity to spend a year with the armed forces. And then, of course, we suspect that many of them will want to either go into the regular forces or, as I have done, have many decades.
No, but you're telling me why they might want to do it. What I'm asking you about is a military which can't actually recruit actual soldiers who are going to make it a career. That's what they really need. And now you're telling them, oh, by the way, you've got to look after some kids for a year who aren't going to stay.
Well, what we are going to see is the people going to the military bit of this will have volunteered to do so. They will be motivated. They will.
You're telling me the same thing again.
Yeah, I know, because I'm going to finish my point this time. Is that they will, of course, have had a period of military training. They will have utility to the military, and that is part of it, but not the whole point of it. The broader point about this national service is that we want to build a society where people mix with people outside their own communities, mix with people from different backgrounds, different religions, different income levels. And so some of it is about utility to the armed forces, that's part of it. But the bulk of this is about helping build a cohesive society where people mix outside their bubble, whether it's through military service, other uniformed service or non-uniformed service.
Look, I can hear the aspiration here, and we can have a discussion about whether what you're proposing is really serious. But let me put this to you. This is really about getting the attention of people who say they're going to vote reform, to whom this would appeal, isn't it?
What this is about is
I mean, it's politics.
Well, I'm a politician, so you shouldn't be completely surprised that I'm involved in politics. But the point is, this is politics.
Oh, good. I'm glad a politician who says it's political, who's ready to admit.
No, but politics is how we deal with really serious issues, and this is about dealing with what we know to be the case, which is social fragmentation. Too many young people live in a kind of a bubble within their own communities. They don't mix with people of different religions. They don't mix with different viewpoints. More people are saying that they wouldn't go out with someone who didn't have the same political views. And what we're saying is to respond to that is a political imperative.
Okay, well, let me ask you...
And to respond to that is about bringing people together in different forms. Military, medical, volunteering...
I get all that, and it's
flood defences and environmental protection.
It's all perfectly reasonable. Now, let me ask you, as a politician, do you think that this will help you gain the attention of those reform voting the electors in, for example, the Red Wall constituencies?
So what we are motivated by is making sure that we have a cohesive society. Now,
Okay,
of course,
all right.
no, look, Trevor, this is an election.
Okay.
So, of course, at an election, you come up with new ideas, and you come up with ideas that we hope will attract votes to us. There's nothing illegitimate about that. But it is fundamentally about addressing the concerns that we see about social fragmentation. We're trying to prime a new generation of volunteers. Do something that I've spent a lifetime doing, and I've loved every minute.
I understand. I want to talk to you about this election. Did the Prime Minister explain to you why he chose to call an election when you haven't actually selected all your candidates?
Well, the reason we've called the election now is because we've seen inflation get back into normal levels. We can see the economic indicators heading in the right direction. We're in a position now where we can show that our plan is working, and there is going to be an explanation of what we are going to do next to keep ourselves on track. There are always going to be pros and cons for any timing of an election. As we said in the green room, frankly, I'd much prefer to be campaigning in the early spring than the late autumn. But we are ready to make what is a bold move. I get that, because we are confident of our offer to the British people.
I understand that you've still got to select in 190 constituencies.
Well, the selection process has been going on. There will be lots of places where the selections were just on the verge of happening. I can name a whole load of them off the top of my head already, which I'm not going to. So that will happen very, very quickly. But look, I've been chairman of the party. You always have to do selections right up until the last minute. There's nothing particularly unusual about that.
That's the sort of number that you know, the 190, 200.
Well, look, I'm not in CCHQ, so I don't know the detail. I know we've got plenty that we still need to select, but we've got a fantastic pool of candidates, incredibly diverse in terms of their life experience and what they bring to.
All right, let's get into the actual campaign itself. Let's start with Mr. Sunak's announcement. Let's remember this.
The 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders.
In this country, every couple that plans a wedding prepares for rain. Every village cricket captain prepares for rain. Yet you managed to make this the image that is going to haunt the Prime Minister for the next 6 weeks. What were you thinking?
So the bottom line is sometimes it rains in the UK, you're absolutely right, but also what we've seen is rain. Rain is not going to put us off.
Could have got the bloke with the umbrella out. I mean, this is high-level incompetence, isn't it?
No, look, I tell you, whatever way that we had responded to the rain, whether we'd moved the announcement, whether we had someone with an umbrella, you guys would have criticised us. You would have found a vector for criticism. The bottom line is, the Prime Minister set out the case for why we are going to the country. We're very proud of the tough decisions that we have made to get inflation back down to normal levels. We've got a plan for the future, and we're going to compare that with the Labour's complete lack of a plan.
I'm not
and
asking,
you would have criticised him
I'm not asking
if we'd
this
moved
to be
it, if we delayed it,
I
if
wasn't
someone was
asking
holding
that
an
question to
umbrella.
be a smart aleck. I know there are people who will do that, but what's happened since then? You kicked off the campaign with this, then you went to a brewery with a Prime Minister who doesn't drink. You followed it up with a trip to the Titanic, the jokes write themselves, and then you organise a huddle with reporters where he's standing under an exit sign. My point is, who would trust a team that does all of that to run the country when they can't even get the basics of a campaign right?
So when people are going to the ballot box, are they going to ask, was it raining when he made the announcement? Or are
They're going to remember
or are they
that they couldn't actually do the detail?
Or are they going to ask, who was the person that was instrumental in the furlough programme that kept a roof over my head during COVID? Who was the person that got a grip of inflation so it went from over 11% down to normal bounds? Who was the person who started reducing the national insurance contributions so me and my family have got money? Who is the person who's going to protect pensions?
With respect,
so they may remember the image of the rain.
With respect, you and I have both...
every month they will look at their pay slip and see that under the Conservatives they're paying less tax than they would do.
With respect, you and I have both been knocking on doors. We talk to a lot of voters in our careers, and actually, I don't think you can dismiss it like that. This is the kind of thing that people remember. Let me ask you about something else that they
I've been knocking on doors.
Let me ask you about something else that they will remember.
No one's brought it up.
Let me ask you about something else that they'll remember. There was vital legislation that you were trying to put through. Some of it has dropped. And one particular thing I suspect will come back, which is Figs and Murray walked 200 miles from Manchester to London, campaigning for Martin's Law, which is about protection for those potential victims of terrorism. Mr. Sunak looked her in the eye on Wednesday, 7th anniversary of her son's death in the Manchester Arena bombing, and told her that that law would be passed when he must have known that was not going to happen. Has he apologised to her?
So I don't know whether the Prime Minister's spoken to Figen and her family. I was in the meeting with the Prime Minister, and the commitment that we made, and we said, and I remember going through the detail, that we said there is an election coming. We said that we could not necessarily guarantee the law would have completed its entire passage before the general election.
She walked out and she believed that she had been told it would happen.
We said, no, I was in the meeting, Trevor. No, please, this is really important. This is really important. I was in the meeting and I said to her that I have no doubt that even if it is delayed by a general election, I explicitly made the point it might be, that there is cross-party support on this and that we are determined to make sure this does get on the statute.
She has been saying for the last 48 hours she believed it would be passed. Whatever rights and wrongs of it, would you like just to apologise to her now? This is a matter of character, trust and the position of politicians. So you could simply say, look, I'm really sorry it didn't happen.
So of course we're sorry that not all the legislation was passed, and I'm particularly...
No, this specific one.
And I'm particularly sorry that we weren't able to get Martin's Law on the statute books before the general election. But I discussed with the family and the campaign group that it might straddle a general election, that if we re-entered government, we would prioritise this to get it on because it has taken longer than we would have wanted. And I said there is cross-party support, and I said I cannot envisage a world where this does not get enacted, even if it is delayed because of a general election.
Let me take you on to you're responsible for the biggest flagship policy for this government until the national service one, which is the Rwanda boat. Yesterday, we broke through the 10,000 barrier for the number of individuals crossing the channel in small boats in the first 150 days of the year, highest that there's ever been. You call this election at this point because actually you know that you're not going to be able to stop these small boats, and that a summer of this is would have killed your chances.
Well, of course, dealing with illegal migration is difficult. It's difficult in the UK. It's difficult across Europe. When I speak to my colleagues in America, Australia, and other countries, they're finding it difficult as well. But we have a plan which is part about the Rwanda scheme, which is an important part of it. It is about making sure that we have that international cooperation, and we are committed to do so, which is...
Forgive me for interrupting you, but I and viewers have heard minister after minister say, we've got a plan, it's working, it's working. It's not working. You're at 10,000, the highest number ever.
Well, what we are seeing is the people smugglers changing their tactics. They're forcing more people onto the boats. Now, that's...
fundamentally, they're getting more people across the channel. They are winning, you're not.
Because they are responding to the tactics which are putting pressure on their supply chains. Now, the point we've made is that we have got the Rwanda scheme, which is part of our arsenal, and these figures are not where we would want them to be, but they would be considerably worse if the Labour Party started unpicking things like the Rwanda scheme, which they have promised to do. The Labour's position on this is that they would do less than we are currently doing, less than we plan to do, and somehow magically they think that would reduce the boat numbers, and that is just fundamentally dishonest with the voters.
Well, the point is it hasn't. But let me just very finally ask you a question, not just about illegal migration, but legal migration. Net migration fell by 10% this week, and I'm sure you would claim that as a success. But the problem is the number of people entering the country is pretty much the same as it was last year, 1.2 million, thereabouts. the reason net migration numbers have fallen is because more people are leaving the country. Is that part of the plan to make living in Britain so unbearable for some people that they leave, and that's how you achieve your objective?
So part of the reason why more people are leaving is because the students and student numbers count on our overall migration figures. And they dropped during the COVID years. A number of international students have come to the UK. They're now completing their courses and they are leaving. We are getting a grip of the areas where there have been more people coming on visas, like the health and social care visas, bringing dependents. So we are dealing with that, which is one of the reasons why.
So your plan is basically to get rid of health workers, social care workers, doctors, nurses, all the IT professionals we need?
No, our plan is to make sure that we get back to the kind of levels which we had just before COVID. COVID distorted a huge number of things. And the point is, and I just want to touch on this. And
very briefly, if you wouldn't mind.
On immigration, the Labour Party are trying to persuade the British people that despite the fact they have voted against border control measures over 130 times, they suddenly have got a plan. And their flagship policy, no, Trevor, this is about integrity. Their flagship policy is to announce the creation of something that already exists. Commanded by General Duncan Capps with 700 multi-agency people.
Forgive me.
And that's what they're claiming.
That point to Labour spokespeople. So we don't...
Please do.
Viewers know this already. So
they either don't know what they're talking about or they're being dishonest. And ignorance and stupidity are not a sales point, and dishonesty is not a sales point either.
Good. I'm glad we're not going to be mincing our words in this campaign. Home Secretary, thank you very much.
Cheers.
What our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by Conservative peer Lord Daniel Finkelstein, Labour peer Baroness Aisha Hazarika, and broadcaster Rachel Johnson. Aisha, this national service, it's not that eccentric. Other countries do it. Why is it such a problem for us?
It's not an eccentric idea at all. It's a potentially a reasonable thing to talk about. It does feel, though, like it's quite a desperate gimmick that has been brought in, as you rightly put to the Home Secretary, to try and throw some red meat to those reform voters, those older voters in the red wall. Let's take a step back. Let's look at the things that people really, really care about right now. Number one is the economy and their own living standards. Number two is the NHS and other public services. Crime is really high up there. And, of course, immigration is up there. This National Care Service, I'm afraid we've already had a bit of a thick of it style election campaign launch from the Conservatives. It's disaster after disaster. This smacks as real desperation. This is not the burning issue that the country is talking about. This is like somebody has got into a room and they've panicked and they thought, right, Nigel Farage is not standing. We might have a chance to get some of these old people back. What can we do? And it's so ridiculous. Also, to be serious about this, if you want to do a National Care Service, it's got to be really well organised. By the way, David Cameron talked about this stuff back in the day.
National Citizen Service?
National
Care Service is a Labour idea.
But this idea has been floated around before. It needs to be really well managed. It needs to have a lot of thought, it needs to be really disciplined. And let's be honest, if you look at something like the Rwanda scheme, there is no thinking that this government is going to be the government after the next general election and would have the wherewithal and the gumption to make it work.
Daniel, what do you make of it?
If it's a good idea, I don't think it can be a gimmick. And also, it doesn't just appeal to older people. I've got some problems with spending more money on anything, so I'm very fiscally conservative and I worry about that element of it. And obviously there are practical issues, but the polling, I'm a chairman of a think tank called Onward, and we've done polling on this, and it suggests that 2/3 of young people are in favour of it. So actually I don't think it does just aim at older people. Somebody I noticed was saying, what is the political strategy behind this? I don't think it is just reform. I think it's two things. I think it's trying to show the Conservative Party has energy and new ideas, because otherwise the time for a change, the whole change labelling of Labour is very strong, it's very popular, and the Conservatives have got to get across that somehow by showing they haven't run out of ideas. I think that's the first thing. And secondly, Rishi Sunak has suggested he wants to make security a key component of the election campaign. This is an attempt to refocus a little bit on kind of national responses to challenges to the country. So I think it does have a sense, obviously, and it's interesting that you put it there, because obviously it's plausible to say it looks desperate and everything. I think we have to avoid narrative, which is that everything the Conservatives do because they're behind, is panic and it's, incompetent and it's stupid. That is imposing a narrative. We should just calmly look at, is this a good idea? And I've got some questions about that. And then
narratives matter.
Well, they do, but it's also our job to get across those.
Can I just ask one question about it, though, which is, all of that makes sense. I wonder whether it's very conservative, mandatory service of any kind. Is that...
Well, it's quite...
It's
quite conservative. It isn't very libertarian, although those are different concepts. That's quite interesting in itself. It seems a sort of slightly a component of what was also the case in the 2017 election, which is the Conservative Party moving away slightly from the emphasis purely on small state towards more emphasis on what the nation can do together. And that has always been an element of conservatism. It's just been rather dormant.
I like it. I just think the problem with it is it's not going to happen. Labour's offering 18-year-olds or 16 to 18-year-olds the vote, and the Tories are offering them national service. I think that it's got a lot going for it. I mean, it was abolished in 1963, so there are very few people who are going to be voting in this election in July who've ever experienced national service. But it's always been this kind of totemic good thing. I mean, Prince Harry, I think... Actually, that's a great idea. We should put Prince Harry in charge. If that, gives him something proper to do. Minette Batters said,
the president of the National Farmers Union,
outgoing president of the NFU, said we need a national service. We haven't got enough people to pick our fruit. The head of the army said we need to bring back national service. We need a citizen army. There are lots of reasons to do this. As I said, it won't happen.
And I think Rachel's hit upon something really important there. This has been done, and I know Danny doesn't like this word as a gimmick. I think it is a gimmick, but what it does reveal is that we have a country which has got so many systemic, fundamental problems, whether it's fruit pickers, whether it's people to work in our care service. Now, a lot of that is because of Brexit and other things. But to Danny's point about how this country needs to shore up its security, I agree, we're in very uncertain times. But the troop numbers have fallen over the last few years. This idea of sticking plasters, trying to get young people to solve these structural problems. We need an army which is properly paid and properly recruited. We need fruit pickers, we need agricultural workers there. The idea of getting young people to fix these problems is not the answer.
So first of all, I do assert it cannot be both a good idea and a gimmick, right? It's either a good idea or it's a gimmick. But also, I'm a gradualist. I'm a gradualist, so I don't think you can solve all those problems at once. The only question is, does this a step forward or not? And I think the big question about it is whether or not it's a good use of £2.5 billion if that's what it costs, right? Or are there other things that you'd rather do with?
You'd rather do with that on the actual army itself?
Well,
we should.
Well,
the answer to that is yes, we should.
I like nobody's mentioned social cohesion. I mean, this is the other thing. If everyone has to do it at age 18, isn't that a good thing? It's a more in common thing. It shows that it's a part of the levelling up strategy, and as you pointed out earlier, the money is coming out of the levelling up fund.
It's also a proper, interesting idea. That's the reason why I'm kicking back a little bit strongly. We ought to have proper, interesting ideas in the election.
Levelling up was a great idea, but it ended up being a gimmick in the end because nothing happened. It was basically a very good slogan.
I'll tell you what is most interesting about this. It's in this campaign, it's the first thing that has evoked this level of discussion and intensity. For the last 3 days, actually, we've been talking about the mechanics of it, and the kind of impression. And I just want to show you something about that. We developed a word cloud, which came from More in Common developed a word cloud. They asked people what did they think of Starmer's launch speech and Sunak's speech. And it is pretty clear what the country thinks. Starmer, change, that's their word, they really want to push. And Sunak's speech, wet. And I noticed that word desperate. Rachel.
Did you do a map which showed, a Venn diagram which showed the words that they had in common? Because as things stand, the two parties don't have... They've got quite a lot in common in terms of their main proposals, as far as we know what they are.
Well, that's true. You can see rubbish on both.
Rubbish, boring.
Confident on both. But anyway, yes.
It definitely was wet, but I'm an outlier because I loved his launch, because I thought it took the best of 2 Richard Curtis movies. I'm just a Prime Minister standing in front of the country asking for your vote, and is it raining? I hadn't noticed. I got a laugh out of Lord Finkelstein.
Well, it's interesting, because what those are basically showing you is that people are going to vote Labour in large amounts, which is something we already knew. It is partly sort of about people's fitting it into the way that they feel about it. But certainly it was interesting to me. What they obviously did was to say, let's go out into the rain. He won't get that wet. When you think, well, if it's pouring with rain, of course you're going to get that wet. And it's a bit like also, let's go out into an election. We might win it when you're miles behind in the polls. So it did sort of suggest a mindset, which is let's go for it anyway. Something might change. And in this particular case, it didn't. I mean, I think all of us who've been political professionals did think you should have had an umbrella. It didn't help the England manager when he went out he became the Wally with the brolly. So going out with an umbrella would also we'd have been discussing his umbrella and Neville Chamberlain, because everyone's looking to fit. And some of these things, I think the wet thing they shouldn't have done, right? The rest of it, to some extent, is narrative, right? And we should avoid that a little bit during the election campaign and try, as we've done, with this, and try and talk about.
Let me ask you particularly, Aish, because you've been very close to handling politicians and so on and so forth. And I don't want you to give advice to the Conservative Party, but just as a professional, how do they dig themselves out of the hole of this narrative? Because I think it probably is a bit unfair that actually everything's now being interpreted through this lens.
Well, I push back against that. Politics is a very much a narrative game, and it's tough. Politics is really, really tough. And the narrative is really important. I would say, and one of my jobs, for example, I worked for Tony Blair in 2005, was to help set up these shots, and you would be looking for exit signs and so he doesn't have moron on the back of his head and all that kind of thing, those sort of basic things. Politics is tough. Stuff can go wrong. Of course it's tough. But hand on heart, and I've been involved in politics for like 25 years, this is the worst campaign launch I have ever seen.
We're still talking about it.
Hang on, let me finish. This is the kind of thing which even the thick of it wouldn't dare to dream about writing about. It's so bad the downfall memes have already begun.
Okay.
And the problem is it's very difficult to turn that around when, I know Dan doesn't like it, but when a narrative is set. And the optics are very important. Remember that. I remember that with Ed Miliband.
By being 20% behind.
All right.
That's what sets the narrative.
That was a terrible
Things can only get better. Things can only get better.
Discipline. In any campaign, there should be discipline, and there will be discipline in this studio. It is just after 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. The Home Secretary told this programme that introducing mandatory national service would not result in anyone going to jail. He said it was a political solution to social fragmentation. James cleverly said the numbers of small boat arrivals are not where they'd want them to be, as it reached 10,000 this year. Lots more to come this morning. Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall will set out Labour's pitch to the nation shortly. Plus, after months of speculation about whether he'll stand, Nigel Farage has finally given an answer. Thanks, but no thanks. He remains Reform UK's Honorary President, and he'll be joining us later this hour. Let's turn to Labour now. I'm joined live by the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall. Good morning.
Good morning, Trevor.
Now, Labour's already pouring scorn on the government's national service proposal. We've been talking about it. But, similar mandatory programmes exist right across the world, including in Norway, Denmark, Austria, Switzerland, Greece, South Korea, France, and what used to be Labour's favourite country, Sweden, has it. Why are you just rejecting it out of hand?
Look, elections should be about the country's future, not fighting for a better past. And I think this announcement sort of epitomises the choice at the next election. More of the same from the Conservatives, yet another unfunded spending commitment.
They're funding it. They said it's 2.5 billion. It's coming out of the Levelling Up Fund. They know where it's coming from.
Well, interestingly enough, that UK Prosperity Fund is supposed to be used to tackle economic inactivity and helping people get back into work. So, that really undermines another one of their arguments. But actually, this is an unfunded commitment, a headline-grabbing gimmick That
not
is,
unfunded. I've just said where it's coming from.
It is not a proper plan to deliver, and it doesn't really deal with the big challenges facing young people who are desperate, Trevor. They are desperate to get the skills and qualifications they need, to get good jobs, to have a home they can call their own. And Labour has a fully costed, fully funded plan to give young people those real opportunities that they need to build a better life. And that's the choice of this election.
It's easy to mock, but I think I talked to the Home Secretary this morning. I don't know if you probably hadn't had a chance to see that interview, but he, I think, made an important point, which is that we live in a society which is increasingly fragmented. Everybody talks about this, technology, community disintegration, as it were. And this is, you may not agree with it, but it is at least an answer to how do you deal with that? Particularly, how do you bring young people together so that we are, in a sense, one society? You surely can't be against that aim.
I think that the way we bring young people and our country together is by ensuring everyone feels they've got a shot at success, that they can have the opportunities to fulfil their potential, that they can get the job of their dreams, that they can have a chance of getting on the housing ladder, that they get those skills. And that isn't a plan to deliver it. What it actually is asking young people to solve the problems in the NHS, the police and the armed services that the Tories themselves have created. So I know, if I think about my niece, God bless her, who is currently doing her A-levels, she has worked herself into the ground to do this. She has had a job.
Hang on, you're not really addressing the point
that she is giving back.
There are all those other things that they can do.
But she's giving back, and she's putting the effort in.
You're not addressing the point that cleverly made to me, which is that actually we do have a problem of social cohesion in this country. And this is at least one answer to it. It might not be the answer that you like, but at least it is an answer. What is your answer that doesn't involve saying the Tories are rubbish? What is Labour going to do about that problem?
What gives people a sense of belonging in this country is a sense that they have a chance of success. It is by making sure institutions, by giving them the skills and training and other opportunities, by having the jobs they need, but also the institutions that bring people together, like the NHS that desperately needs funding. That is also really important, and I'm afraid this doesn't deal with it, but it is about the choice. Labour's plan for young people in the future, this headline-grabbing gimmick that takes us back to the past.
Load of funding for the NHS to provide better wages and bring more young people into it.
We will have 40,000 extra appointments every single week in the evenings and at the weekends to transform access to the NHS.
Mostly done by foreign doctors and nurses, not our young people.
Well, I myself have just had some amazing NHS treatment by people from all over the world.
Exactly.
And I am very, very grateful to them for that and want to thank them. But, those appointments would make a real difference. If you are left waiting in pain for treatment, if you are left waiting in pain for treatment, if you're facing that 8 a.m. scramble to see the GP, 40,000 extra appointments every week would make a massive difference. You're taking us on to a different... Well, you took me on to the different question.
I'm trying to ask you about the problem that this thing is supposed to solve. But anyway, let's just deal with some of the things that you're responsible for. By the way, one thing that has been lost as a result of the early election is the bill to phase out sale of cigarettes to people under 15. You were partly responsible, I think, for the 2006 smoking ban. If you were elected...
It wasn't me personally, but I was working for...
Well, you were working for the politicians. You're an advisor on that. If Labour is elected, will it reintroduce that bill to stop people under 15 buying cigarettes?
I mean, West Streeting has been campaigning for that. And, if we're elected, we will make that happen and make it less likely that young people will smoke than vote Tory.
All right. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, the gurus on all public spending, are saying that the next government is going to have to do one of three things: cut spending, raise taxes, or borrow to fund spending. And that's about you as much as the Tories. Rachel Reeves is saying this weekend, that you won't borrow. So, where are the cuts going to fall, or are you going to raise taxes?
Well, we've set out where we will increase taxes to fund our commitments.
Those are windfall taxes. You're talking about $1 billion or $2 billion.
Well, no, it's not just that.
We're talking
it's not just
here
that,
about
Trevor. It's a proper,
tens of billions
It's
needed.
a proper windfall tax to help fund Great British Energy to bring people's bills down. It's ending the non-dom tax loopholes and tax avoidance to help fund our vital NHS. And it's ending the tax breaks for private schools to put the 6,500 teachers in specialist. Look, let's take a step back here. This election is going to be about who is trusted on the economy. And we will not make spending commitments that we can't keep, because we've seen what happens to ordinary people when that happens. It's their mortgages that go up.
All right.
It's their food and fuel bills that go up. And we don't want ordinary working people to
May I ask you
suffer.
about a concrete thing which is in your bailiwick? It's probably the biggest decision that you would have to take. The triple lock on pensions means that people like me get above inflation increases in our pensions, cost the nation 11 billion extra this year, could add up to 45 billion in the years ahead, up in 2050. Are you going to keep the triple lock on pensions?
Yes.
Okay.
And
so
let me tell you
let me ask you this. That's very good. It's an admirably clear answer. It's the sort of answer we don't normally see here. So I'm going to bank that one. So your plan is to put off defence spending when we face at least 2 wars, cut prison spending when crime's rising, delay social care reform while you give the richest old people in our history an annual bung.
That's not what we do. And let me
That's
tell
what
you
that
why.
means. That's what the triple lock does.
Let me first say why on the triple lock. Because I think there's somewhat of a misunderstanding about what's happening to many pensioners in this country. We now have 1 in 5 pensioners in poverty, with poverty rising in every region of the country. More people are taking their pension early. They are spending down their savings, and we have seen a doubling of the number of pensioners relying on food banks. And for the future, more and more people are going to be paying off their mortgages or renting into retirement. So having that stability and a clear commitment on the basic state pension alongside reforms to second pensions is what we really need to give people a decent security in retirement. I think that is important. And on those other issues that you've raised about defence spend, it is this government that has wasted 15 billion on defence procurement, that has cut our armed forces to their smallest size since Napoleonic times. We have been clear about our commitment to defence and having a proper strategic review so we can keep our country safe.
Let's talk about another issue that you're going to have to deal with if you become the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. There's huge weight on the economy of the 9+ million individuals who are economically inactive. They don't have a job, they're too ill to hold one down, they don't want one. You said recently words to the effect that no one is going to be able to stay on the sick under Labour. What are you going to do that the Tories won't do?
We are an older, sicker nation. We also have more and more young people suffering from mental health problems. We need to drive down the waits for NHS treatment, overhaul skills so people can get the jobs, today's jobs and jobs of the future. And crucially, we need to overhaul how job centres work to end this sort of tick box culture and to focus relentlessly on helping people into work. This is a really, really big issue. Between now and the end of the next Parliament, there will be £27 billion extra spending on sickness and disability benefits. 2 million people who are out of work because of those issues say they want to work if they have the right help and support. That is our plan. And what I specifically on what I said for young people, we will transform your skills, give disabled people access to work. And in return for that, those new opportunities, there will be no option of a life on benefits. And I think that's right for the economy and for them, because if you're out of work when you're young, it ruins your life chances in later life. Fully costed,
that
fully
is a series of
funded
ambitions.
plan.
Can I just ask you one?
It isn't. It's a fully funded, fully costed plan.
Let me just ask you one quick last question, because I talked to the Home Secretary about the Rand scheme. I know you don't like it and all that. We don't need to go over that. I just want to know...
There isn't really a scheme, is there?
OK, yeah. I just want to know something about Labour's position on what would happen if you came into office. There is a growing problem of thousands who have crossed the channel already, but they aren't allowed to seek asylum under the legislation that's been passed. If you came into office, you wouldn't send those people to Rwanda. You won't send them home, the Afghans and Iranians, for example. What are you going to do with them? And we're talking tens of thousands now.
Our first priority is to set up a new border security command to crack down on those criminal gangs. And we will have those new specialist investigators.
I understand the general point, but what are you going to do with this group of tens of thousands of people?
We will drive down that backlog.
But what are you going to do with the people who are already here?
We are spending £8 million a day funding people in hotels. We have got the highest number in the first 5 months of this year ever coming over in the boats.
Your colleague has said this several times on this programme. What are you going to do about this group of people who currently are in the country, who have no status? You say you won't send them to Rwanda. You can't send them back. What are you going to do with them?
We have got to drive down that asylum backlog, and we have set forward, once again, our fully funded, fully costed plans to bring that backlog down. But the real thing here is we need to stop those boats. That's why we'll launch our new border security plan to crack down on the criminal gangs.
Liz Kendall, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Trevor.
Back to our panel. Daniel Finkelstein, Aisha Hazarika and Rachel Johnson. What do you think, Daniel, of what Liz had to say about the national service question?
Yeah, that's a legitimate objection to it, and obviously that will be the argument. Whether we think this is a priority and is it a good use of the money are legitimate questions. It's a big, substantial idea, and that's what election campaigns should be about. And I think part of what the Conservative Party is undoubtedly trying to do is to show it has the energy to govern. It still has something new to say. So I think it's definitely, among all the things like it was raining and all that, it's actually a good, solid idea to start the election campaign with. And funnily enough, I've slightly got some questions with it on a substantial level, the question of whether it's a priority. But what I don't doubt is it's a proper thing that we ought to be debating, and what the future of the country is.
The more I think about it, I mean, I think it's such a good idea. I think Labour should actually steal it, because you could provide a qualification at the end of it, which should be something that these young people, these teenagers, could actually take to an employer. I mean, it will look good on their CVs. They'll get some training. I mean, I think there's everything to like about it at the moment.
Aisha, we talked with Liz Kendall about this, about the rent scheme, and I must say that obviously Labour's made its positions very clear on what it doesn't want to do. But do you think that there's a danger that over 6 weeks, it's very hard to sustain not saying anything about this growing number of people who, under current legislation, should be sent to Rwanda? If Labour comes in, they say from day one they're going to stop it. What do they do about them? 25,000 of them now. By the end of the summer, there'll be 5,000, 10,000 more.
Well, look, these are the big issues we're talking about, just because I didn't throw my bit in on the national care service. Just listening to Liz Kendall, I think, I'm sorry, Danny, I know you think gimmick is a bad word, but this is just not look, if the Conservatives had been talking about this national service thing in the run-up to the election, I would have given them more kind of credit for it. But I think when you look at what young people are going through, not getting on the housing ladder, really struggling with their mental health, the cuts to youth services as well across the last period of time with austerity, they're all things. If you care about young people, they are the things. But let's move on to the Rwanda stuff
Just very
now.
quickly, because I've got to go to a break.
Yeah.
Look,
the Rwanda, there's no quick fix on the small boats coming over. But one thing which is true, this backlog that has been allowed to build up, and even you speak to lefty immigration lawyers and they will say the backlog is ridiculous. What Labour will have to really put a shift in on, and the Tories have just got round to doing this, they're going to have to really get on with dealing with that backlog. That is going to have to be one of the absolute priorities, along with setting up this command system.
all right. Coming up, I'll speak to one of the most consequential people in British politics for the last decade and more, Reform President Nigel Farage.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute. Okay.
We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well? I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me!
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
He's loomed large over, even dominated at times, British politics for years, if not decades. He brought us UKIP and then the Brexit Party, and is now honorary president of its successor, Reform UK. That party is now standing candidates in constituencies across the country, it says. And with it having more than 10% in national polls for months, it is a real and present danger, especially to the Conservatives. But what does Nigel Farage really want? To elect Reform UK people, destroy the Conservatives, or refashion the right in his own image? Let's ask who joins me now. Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
First, let's just deal with the news of the day. Do you support the government's proposal for a national service?
They don't support it either. It's a joke, isn't it? I mean, look, what you do, you get a focus group of half a dozen Reform voters in a room, and the chairman says, now, what about national service? Oh, I think it's a very good idea. The rest say, yeah, actually, not a bad idea. Oh, policy. So, I mean, look, when you're a weak leader, and Sunak is not a leader in any way at all, you're a follower. So you follow what the focus groups say, and you say, by doing this, I can attack the Reform vote. That's what it's all about. And look, it's totally impractical. The army has shrunk from 100,000 to 75,000 in 14 years of conservatism. And most interestingly, we have a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, in fact, loathe much of what we stand for. So what do you do?
Who are we talking about there?
Oh, I think we see them on the streets of London every Saturday.
What do they look like? Oh, we're talking about...
What do they look like?
Are we talking about Muslims here?
We are. And I'm afraid I found some of the recent surveys saying that 46% of British Muslims support Hamas, support a terrorist organisation that is prescribed in this country. So we've been, and what's interesting is that this Prime Minister is building up far more of that population than anybody before in history.
Well, this is very interesting, and we don't have that survey in front of us, but let's just unpick what you've just said. Are you sure you want to make the blanket accusation that you've just made that Muslims are somehow less patriotic than other British people? Because those people on those demonstrations are British.
Did you watch the recent elections that took place up and down the country?
We don't know that, and we don't know they support Hamas. Would you like to revisit what you said at all?
Let's be clear. There is a growing population of people in this country, a lot of them very young, who have recently been voting for and electing candidates, right, up and down the country, in inner cities, who stand for a set of values that are completely, not only don't subscribe to our values, but in many cases are totally against our values. And the marches, there are some on those marches. Equally, there are lots of upper middle class girls called Jocasta on those marches as well, and I understand that. But we have to face the fact, and at some point, by 2029, the Labour Party will have to face the fact that they started a policy of irresponsible, open-door immigration, but nobody in history has allowed more people in who are potentially going to fight against British values than Mr. Sunak. And if you look at those figures last week, if you look at the sheer numbers that were coming in last week, you really have to ask yourself some questions.
Well, is this the thrust of the reform campaign, that actually immigration means that our values are threatened, and particularly we are unhappy about Muslims? Because that is a pretty incendiary proposition.
We have never before seen anything like this. You think about West Indian immigration into Britain, the post-World War II.
I think of very little else.
West Indian immigration into Britain post-World War II. You know, there were a lot of shared things there. Shared history, shared culture, shared religion in many cases. Most families that came could say one of their family had served with British forces in World War I, World War II, love of cricket. You know, the list goes on, but there were commonalities. And, you know, as you know with your previous job, the key to immigration is integration. If you get integration, it works. What we've done is, and this works on several levels. We've done...
I'm going to stop you there, and I'm going to say two things.
Well, here's the difference.
No, I'm going to tell you something about the difference. First of all, you're right, I come from that stock. But let us remember that my stock, my ancestors, for the best part of 700 or 800 years, were Muslims until they were forcibly converted to Christians by slave owners. So when you talk about Muslims as hostile to British values, I've got to say, I don't really. Let me finish what I'm going to say. I don't really see I don't really see how you arrive at that conclusion. And secondly, trying to say to me, you know, actually, you guys are not really like these other guys. I mean, you and I have known each other a long time. Can you imagine how offensive that is to a British Muslim? Let me ask you to put yourself in the shoes of a British Muslim, and can you imagine how offensive that feels?
How many people from your community fail to speak English?
How many people?
From the West Indian community don't speak English.
We all speak English, but actually so do most Indian Muslims, so do pretty much all Pakistani Muslims in this country.
I can take you to streets in Oldham where virtually no one speaks English.
I've been there too, but honestly, come on.
The point I'm making is this.
Serious.
I am not here to attack the religion of Islam, but I am here...
Well, you've just been doing it for 3 minutes.
No, I haven't. I'm telling you the alarming figures that have been coming out of these recent polls, particularly in the wake of what has happened on October the 7th and in Gaza, and we have a real problem here. We want...
All right.
I mean, firstly, all right, numbers on immigration need to be sensible, otherwise everyone's quality of life gets diminished. Diminished. Diminished in every way. Diminished because you can't get a GP appointment. Diminished because you can't travel anywhere without traffic jams. Diminished because getting on a housing ladder is impossible, because we now need to build one new dwelling every 2 minutes.
I want to get on to...
And that's apart from...
I want to get on to politics, but I just want to be absolutely clear, and I want to give you the opportunity to be clear, because everything you've just said suggests that the reform platform for this election is every problem you face is down to immigrants and in particular to Muslims. Is that really what you're saying?
No, actually, most people aren't yet affected by this because the areas with anti-British values tend to be geographically, at the moment, very tightly concentrated. But they do pose a problem.
But you're not resiling from blaming that community.
I'm blaming elements of that community. I'm not blaming them, I'm stating a fact. All I'm doing is stating a fact. No one else dares tell the truth about this. On the broader question, the biggest single problem this country faces is the population explosion. And it will not be debated in this election. Why? Because Labour started it and the Tories accelerated it.
Okay.
And that has led to problems on a scale that are unimaginable.
Okay, I want to debate that. And let me start it talking to you about this way. Your flagship policy is zero immigration, net zero immigration, right? I talked to James Cleverly earlier on about the fact that net migration numbers are falling a bit.
No.
Well, I know the fact. Let me finish as a fact.
No, I'm really sorry. Let's
they are
get this
falling
right.
a bit. They're falling
They
by
are
10%.
not falling, and here's why. Last year's legal migration figures were 606,000 until they were revised later.
I know, they've gone up.
745.
You haven't let me finish my question.
You haven't let me finish my question. But it was the wrong premise.
No, I want to put some facts to you.
I just did to you.
Inward migration last year, end of 22, was 1.2 million.
Yeah.
Actually,
Staggering.
it hasn't fallen in 2023, and in that sense, you're correct.
Oh, thank you.
But what's interesting is who the migrants are. Now, why don't you have a look at this?
Yep.
Indians up 47%, Nigerians up 907%. Now, the reason that has happened is look at the bottom figure. EU figures down 193%.
How does 75,000 equate to 250,000,
It's
141,000? So a tiny fraction.
Let me finish. Well, actually, if you go back further, the EU, the point is, European Union migrants left post-Brexit.
A few, a handful.
No, a lot more, actually. The point I really want to make is this. You are complaining about the people who you think don't share British values. You're identifying particular communities. And the point I want to make to you is that by the middle of the century, the white British proportion of population will be down below 2/3. That's the thing that I think you're worried about.
I didn't.
But this is.
I didn't say that.
Okay. The people who are.
Don't put words in my mouth.
The thing that you're worried about is your responsibility. You're the father of the policy that produced this.
No,
that made the EU migrants leave and increased the number of non-EU migrants.
Ever heard. Big load of cobblers I've ever heard in my life. What we did by leaving the European Union was to change a policy, which meant we discriminated against the rest of the world, often against talent, interestingly, in favour of an open door with the European Union. What Brexit did was give us back control of our own, by the way, we're not even discussing Dover, get us back control of our legal migration policy. What Boris Johnson chose to do was to set the bars and the levels at the lowest possible level. He also allowed, for example, students to bring dependents. Whether you have to bring your mum with you to go to a British university is beyond me.
But you might have to bring your wife and children if you're a postgraduate.
Well, I'm sorry, we haven't got room. We've really got to start growing up on this. We haven't got room. We cannot go on. And it's unfair to put this population explosion, which you're very vividly showing on the screen, on the British
Because it's a fact. It's a fact.
Yeah, what's a fact?
It's a fact.
What is a fact?
It is the consequence of Brexit.
No, it's a consequence of government policy. You've got to
it only happened after Brexit.
Because Johnson, despite the fact people like me publicly warned, if you set the salary thresholds at this level, there was another massive opening up in 2021. This is Conservative policy. And of course, there's no opposition to it because Labour dare not even debate the issue. This has been done by... If you want mass immigration, vote Conservative. If you want mass immigration, vote Labour. If you want a proper debate about why this is the most impactful policy on everyone's life in this country, then we're the people to talk to in reform.
Are you essentially denying that you have anything to do with the change in immigration policy?
100%.
We said was... Even though the point of your whole campaign was to put it under our control.
Yes.
Boris Johnson used it in whatever you can argue about it, but
no,
it was
you can't argue. Look at the figures.
It was your responsibility that put it in Boris Johnson's hands. He then used it in a particular way. Now you might want.
No, I'm really sorry, but that is absolute rubbish. Getting back control of our own country means we can't blame the European Union.
Okay.
We can't blame anybody else. Those figures. This was done by a Conservative government, and they thought they'd get away with it.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we haven't got all day to argue the toss on this, but I just want to ask you something about your own objectives in politics. You've decided you're not going to run yourself.
With regret. With regret. I had planned.
Why do you regret? What's wrong with it? Why didn't you run?
Because I had a plan.
Which is?
A 6-month plan to come back and campaign full-time for 6 months. The election was announced. It was a shock to me. It wrong-footed me. It's wrong-footed a lot of people, I'll be honest about that. And I took the view, I can't campaign around the country for the party, or come on your show, do those things, if I've got to start from scratch, 6 weeks in one constituency. And that was the logic of what I chose.
In the end, either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer is going to be in number 10. You've got to, at some point, choose one of them. In the last election...
Come off it.
And in the last election, you pulled your candidates against sitting Tories.
For a historic reason.
Which essentially meant the Tories got back in. Are you going to do something like that at the same time this year? In that case, is your aim to destroy the Conservative Party or to reform it?
The election's over. The election's over. I mean, by the way, isn't it the most boring start to a general election you've ever seen in your history?
I think you've come in to try to make it less boring this morning, haven't you?
I listened
But just deal with my question,
I listened to Sunak on the Today programme the other morning, and after 15, 17 minutes, I can't remember a single thing he said.
Okay.
Sunak's all over the shop.
Okay, but which one
Labour will win. Labour will win.
Okay.
And there needs to be an opposition. And here's the problem. The Conservative Party will be in opposition, but they will not be the opposition. And that's the problem, and that's where reform comes in. It needs to win some seats, it will get millions of votes, and the current Conservative Party is not fit for purpose. It doesn't agree on anything. They'll actually hate each other more in opposition than they do in government, and I want to see the centre-right of British politics completely reshaped.
And that's your job. Nigel Farage, I hope we are going to be talking more about this and other matters in future. Thank you very much for your time this morning. In just a moment, we'll get a first take on all of that with our panel. Back to our panel, Danny Finkelstein, Aisha Hazarika and Rachel Johnson. Well, sometimes you feel that there's a hand grenade being thrown into the studio. Aisha?
Well, I mean, what an interview. And, you know, he really reveals his true colours as just quite a nasty, race-baiting character. Now, I am a Indian, proud Indian, Scottish, British Muslim. I just swore my allegiance to king and country on the Quran just a few weeks ago. The idea that he perpetuates that Muslims can't be trusted, that Muslims are somehow dangerous is so divisive. But he does this a lot. At one point, he said he wouldn't feel comfortable if Romanians lived next to him. He at one point blamed traffic on the M4, on immigrants. I can see from that interview why he doesn't want to stand for Parliament, because he'll get called out. Nigel Farage is a political influencer. He's got no political solutions. He stands from the sidelines, he race baits, he stirs up hatred and division, and he has no actual answers for anything. He got everything he wanted. He got Brexit. He promised that Brexit would solve all these problems. Things have only got worse. He is not an actual politician. He's a sort of nasty, malign
Daniel?
person on the sideline.
I noticed that he said that the election campaign was boring, and I think it's because he prefers these kind of big, broad brush things to any kind of element of detail. But I'd rather fall asleep at the end of the Prime Minister's talk than be incapable of sleeping. You know, speaking also as son of a refugee family, I find he's done it after the Brexit referendum. I remember that he said this was a victory for real people, as if everybody who voted differently to him or thought differently to him wasn't a real person. And I'm very nervous about people who think that they are in charge of what the values of the country are, rather than something that's subject to an argument. As you can imagine, when I watch protest rallies against what Israel's doing, I worry very deeply about some of the arguments that are being used, but it's an argument I'm willing to engage in. I think that simply dismissing an entire ethnic group or religious background as being un-British is a really dangerous thing to do. So I completely understand why Aisha's responded as she had, and it's if he's not running for Parliament, then good, because that's exactly not the debate we want to have.
I don't like identitarian politics, so I'm not going to say that I have actually a Muslim-born grandfather.
But you actually do?
I did. Nothing in what Nigel Farage explained to you about immigration came as a surprise to me. He's anti-woke, he's anti-Tory, he's pro-Brexit, he's pro-reform. He's deeply disappointed that, given the shortness of the election campaign period, that he can't build up a base and win a seat. He doesn't want to lose an 8th time or whatever it is when he's running for Parliament. He speaks to a kind of silent, embarrassed, not majority, but constituency of people who don't like seeing elected officials cry Allahu Akbar when they make their victory speech, and it's he knows he has an audience for that.
Well, actually, at this point I was going to put you, Daniel, objectively, whether one likes what he says or not, do you think it may have an impact on this campaign?
I think its impact is massively reduced by the fact that the election's been held too quickly for him to run in a seat. And while everyone's been talking about the fact there was an exit sign or it's raining, the fact is that Rishi Sunak, by moving the election early, has pushed Nigel Farage out of running a parliamentary race, which I think is good for the debate, given the quality of what we've just seen. But electorally, obviously, that's a gain for the Conservatives. So I know everyone sort of said it was a disastrous start, but that's actually been a very important and positive aspect to what today's announcement.
This is going to be a brutal campaign, but the one thing we can all agree on, we've got to bring this country back together, whoever wins this election, because that kind of horrible, nasty, divisive rhetoric, nobody wants that anymore.
In just a moment, we'll be back with our panel.
Well, extreme turbulence is the exact description for it. We categorise turbulence in several little blocks. There's mild, there's moderate, there's severe, and this is extreme. Basically, what we were experiencing in my my belief is it's called CAT, clear air turbulence. And it's a form of turbulence that is very difficult, almost in fact impossible to predict. Turbulence itself is not actually that rare, but to experiencing something of this degree is phenomenally rare. In my entire career, I think I've had one incident that I would describe as severe, not extreme. And there is certainly in my colleagues, overall, I think I've heard maybe 2, possibly 3 incidents of something that extreme. Although it sounds bizarre, that rate of descent is actually quite normal if the pilot sets it up 1,000 feet a minute. That's fairly normal when we're instigating a controlled descent. Obviously, what they would have experienced, and clearly from the reports, this is what they did experience, was not a nice, smooth controlled descent, but an absolute maelstrom of the airplane flinging itself around all over the sky. We do train in the simulator every 6 months at least, where we experience things that we can't practice in the real airplane, things like emergency procedures, abnormals, and unusual weather conditions like this, for example. So we are taught how to fly the airplane through these extreme events and how to recover them should the airplane depart from its normal flight mode. If you do have your seatbelt off, but sometimes we just do not have the chance to warn you so you can return to a seat, safely buckle yourself in before the adverse conditions occur. So our advice would always be just keep that belt on lightly fastened and it will protect you. The aircraft itself suffered no damage whatsoever, to the best of our knowledge. The landing was made as a precautionary landing because obviously the captain was aware he had medical problems on board and he wanted to get those people seen to as soon as possible. But the aircraft itself, the airframe, we don't believe experienced any damage whatsoever. These things are way, way overbuilt. And as a comfort maybe to the people who are listening and not exactly feeling happy about what they're seeing today, think back to the last time you ever heard about anything like this. You probably won't have done in your entire life before this one.
Both Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer are keen to tell voters that this is a choice between which one of them is Prime Minister and that it's only the Conservatives and Labour that count. And in the last 2 general elections, both dominated by Brexit, that has actually been the case. But current polling suggests that this year is more like 2010 and 2015, when they were squeezed by smaller parties like the Lib Dems and UKIP. Combined, the 2 main parties are now polling around 68%, similar to 2015. The Greens are enjoying some of their best polling ever, with Lib Dems on around 10%, and that's down on some of their past results. But the party points to these massive by-election swings as recent events that they can gain key seats where they are targeting the Tories, mainly in the southeast and the southwest of England. You can see the yellow Lib Dem strip there. Now, Reform UK could also be nipping at Tory heels too. Our poll tracker puts them on an average of 11%. But look where their new supporters are coming from. 2/3 of them backed the Conservatives in 2019. All that said, Labour are not home and dry. They've got Greens to watch out for. Aggregating the results in Bristol wards at local council elections showed that the Greens would have gained at least 2 Bristol parliamentary seats from Labour. Of course, people vote differently at local elections, so there's no guarantee that effect would be repeated come July. The other factor for Labour, which is an interesting one given the interview that we have just had, could be the performance of independents standing on a pro-Gaza, anti-Israel platform. At the local elections, Labour's vote share was down an average of 18 points in wards where at least 1 in 5 people are Muslims. Most Labour seats in those areas should be safe enough to withstand that kind of impact, but it could harm the party's prospects in some target seats like Kendall. Now, let's come back to you. Rachel, you actually were involved in at least actually 2 of these minor parties.
You're calling the Lib Dems a minor party after you've just seen how they're chasing the Tory vote in so many constituencies?
OK, let's call them the Not Labour, Not Tory party.
Yeah.
Do you think that this accounts for some of the volatility that we're seeing in voting at the moment?
What the proliferation of what we've got? Brexit, we've had UKIP, then Brexit and Reform and the Greens and the SNP, all these, I still don't see them breaking the mould when we have a first-past-the-post system. I still think we're going to have a Labour government. It's not going to change the weather, the fact that Reform is taking a big chunk out of the Tory vote.
But it could change the actual final balance, couldn't it?
Of course it could.
I think what's interesting about these smaller parties is that what you're seeing is the emergence of real tactical voting to get the Conservatives out. So there will be a whole swathe of seats in the South, for example, where it will suit the Labour Party if the Liberal Democrats win that. And voters have worked that out as well. We've been seeing that in some of the by-elections that you've held up. So I think that's where these smaller parties are going to be really interesting. Of course, we talked about how Reform can really do damage to the Conservative vote. So I think that's where these smaller parties become very interesting. I actually do think the Liberal Democrats, should have a reasonable night, particularly when you hear about all of these big beasts standing down, Michael Gove standing down from the Conservative Party. So in a way that quite suits Labour. And remember, in 1997, it worked quite well for that Labour landslide to have the Liberal Democrats do reasonably well.
Yeah.
There's
the Liberal Democrats are effectively part of the two-party vote. People will vote Liberal Democrat in areas where they're second, and they'll do it in lieu of voting Labour. There's nothing the Liberal Democrats stand for. You couldn't be in the shadow cabinet and think. And so that's perfectly respectable, by the way, but it's a flavour of Labour, and they would not support a Tory government. They would support a Labour government. They've just taken a rather eccentric decision to form their own party and stay outside the government they're helping to create. But I don't think you can see it as really a separate vote. It's part of the centre-left vote, and actually it shows quite how big the challenge is for the Conservative Party, quite the proportion of the country that isn't with them. I'm not saying that to minimise the Conservative position, but just as a piece of analysis. There are certain things the Liberal Democrats will decide to champion that Labour won't champion, but you could absolutely hold any of those things. In fact, people have, and be a leading Labour spokesman.
I also just want to mention Scotland, because that's really important in this general election, because it's very difficult for Keir Starmer to get a big thumping majority if things don't turn around in Scotland. Things have been bad for Labour in Scotland for such a long time, but that is turning because of the collapse of the SNP there. So it's really interesting seeing you've got, the Conservatives having a lot of challenge in England, and the SNP is having a very difficult time right now. They're just onto their new leader. So Labour's expecting to do quite well in a whole swathe of central belt seats in Scotland. So that's another thing to watch out for.
There's some information which is literally just dropped while we've been on air, which is a poll by YouGov, which says that the British the electorate would be more upset by a Sunak victory, 59%, than they would have been by a Corbyn victory in 2019.
It's weird.
Make sense of that?
It's weird, and I was just going to add on Reform and the small parties. Don't forget that in 2019, the Brexit Party stood down its candidates in favour of the Tories, which led to the 80-seat majority in 2019 for the Tories. They're not. Reform wants. Richard Tice has actually said he wants the Tories to stand down in favour of Reform.
Okay. Well, that's it for this week's show. I'll be back next Sunday, perhaps with some more hand grenades. It's been my pleasure to be with you this morning. Join us again, 08:30.